Have you ever just looked at the news and wondered, how do world leaders actually make these huge decisions? Why do some countries fight while others seem to be friends? Well, a lot of it comes down to the lens they use to see the world. And today, we're going to break down the biggest debate in global politics, this clash of worldviews that secretly shapes almost every headline you read. And it all really starts with this one giant question, doesn't it? Is world peace even possible? Is it just a nice dream, or is it something we can actually build? This single question is what drives an entire field of study.
And that field, of course, is international relations, or IR for short. This is the discipline that tries to untangle that incredibly complex web of friendships, rivalries, and everything in between that makes up our world.
So at its core, IR gives us the frameworks to figure out why nations sometimes work together on big things like climate change, but also why they end up in terrible conflicts. It looks at the whole shebang, politics, economics, culture, all to get to the bottom of what pushes us toward peace and what pulls us back into conflict.
You know, the study of IR didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was really forged in the fire of huge global events. It all kind of started in 1648 with the birth of the modern country. But then, bam, World War I happens. The sheer horror of it sparked this desperate need for change, which gave us the League of Nations. When that failed and World War II broke out, the game changed again, shifting to how we manage powerful rivalries. And of course, in 1991, the Berlin Wall falls, the Cold War ends, and the whole board gets reset for the era of globalization we're in today.
So, to make sense of all this complexity, thinkers have really focused on one great debate, a showdown between two totally different ways of looking at the world.
So in one corner, you've got realism. This view says international politics is just one long, endless struggle for power. And in the other corner, you have idealism, which holds on to the hope that, yes, real peace and cooperation are actually possible. These two visions give us completely different answers to that big question we started with.
All right, let's start with the more skeptical of the two. This is realism. And for realists, at the end of the day, it's all about one thing: power.
So realism kicks off with a pretty pessimistic take on human nature, that we're all basically selfish. It sees the world as anarchic. Now, that doesn't mean chaos in the streets. It just means there's no world government, no global 911 to call when things go wrong. In that kind of world, countries are the main players, and their number one goal is just to survive, which forces them to constantly look for more power to stay safe.
And one of the founding fathers of this theory, Hans Morgenthau, really nailed it. For a realist, everything you see in global politics, it all boils down to this one, single, unending struggle for power between countries. Let's break that down into some ground rules. First, countries or states are the stars of the show. Everyone else is just a supporting character. Second, that whole anarchy thing is key. Since nobody's in charge, every country has to look out for itself. Third, that means a state's top priority above everything else is its own survival and security. And finally, any cooperation you see between countries, it's always temporary and strategic. An alliance only lasts as long as it's useful. If you want the perfect metaphor for the realist worldview, here it is. The world is a giant, global chessboard. It's not a community. Every nation is a player, and every single move, whether it's a trade deal, a treaty, or a military deployment, is a cold, calculated play to gain an edge and secure your position on the board.
Okay, so that's the cold, hard logic of realism. But what if there's another way to see things? Let's flip the coin and look at idealism, which paints a much, much more hopeful picture.
Idealism starts from the complete opposite assumption, that human beings are fundamentally good and cooperative. Idealists believe we absolutely can overcome that constant struggle for power. And how do we do it? By building a world based on morality, on international law, and on strong global institutions like the UN. So the idealist playbook is built on a few core ideas. First, that our natural instinct is to cooperate. Second, this radical idea that foreign policy shouldn't just be about who's strongest, but about doing what's right. Third, a deep, deep faith that institutions and laws can help us solve disputes without going to war. And finally, the belief that when it comes to the world's biggest problems, working together is always the answer. So forget the chessboard. For an idealist, the world is a global community. It's not about winning and losing. It's about building something better together. It's this vision of a world where nations can actually work toward common goals,
all tied together by shared values and a genuine desire for everyone to do well. But of course, the world is rarely that black and white, right? This great debate between realism and idealism didn't just stop there. Over time, new theories have come along to challenge and add some nuance to these classic ideas. For instance, you get neorealism. A thinker named Kenneth Waltz came along and said, hold on, maybe it's not about selfish human nature. Maybe the problem is the structure of the international system itself. That lack of a world government, that anarchy we talked about, is what forces states to compete for power, even if they have the best intentions. And then you have other critiques that question the very foundations of the debate. Feminist scholars like J.N. Tickner look at these traditional theories and argue they're built on a very male-centric view of the world. They ask these really powerful questions, like what happens if you stop defining security as just state survival and start including things like economic safety and freedom from violence for everybody? Suddenly, the whole picture looks completely different.
So, we've talked about realism and idealism, and some of the ways people have built on them. But you might be thinking, this all sounds pretty academic. Why does any of this actually matter in the real world?
Because these theories aren't just in textbooks, they are the invisible scripts running in the minds of our world leaders. Think about it. A leader with a realist worldview might pour money into the military and be suspicious of international treaties. But an idealist leader, they might champion foreign aid and diplomacy. These worldviews directly shape the life and death decisions made about war, peace, and every global crisis you can imagine.
Which, of course, brings it all back to you. When you look at the world today, at all the headlines and the conflicts and those amazing moments of cooperation, which lens makes more sense to you? Is the world really just an endless chessboard? Or is it a global community just waiting to be built? Something to think about.